This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 282 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with horticulturalist Charlie Nardozzi about his new book, The Continuous Vegetable Garden. The plant profile is on bloodroot, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on A Growing Gardener from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Charlie Nardozzi. He's the author of The Continuous Vegetable Garden. Welcome, Charlie.
It's nice to be here, Kathy. Thank you for having me on the show.
Great to have you. And we're going to get into all things about growing our own perpetual food garden. But before we do that, we want to dial back all the way to baby Charlie. And I want to ask, were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
Well, I'm not sure about chlorophyll in my veins, but I certainly had a lot of Italian blood in my veins. I grew up in Connecticut, and my Italian grandparents, who immigrated here 110 years ago, they had 6 kids, and when each one of those kids got married, they gave them a piece of land on the farm in Connecticut to build their house. So I grew up with all my Italian relatives going up and down the road, and the backdrop was the farm, which was, we would call it now, a diversified farm. Basically, he did anything he needed to do to survive. So he had animals, he had big gardens, he had fruit trees, he had hay, he had all kinds of things. And I just grew up with eating a lot of fresh food and having all that farm activity all around me.
Wow. So from that upbringing, which sounds idyllic, I have to say, Charlie, I'm imagining you grew up with fresh food, surrounded by it, and you kind of by osmosis learned how to garden. Did they have you out there working in the garden?
Yes, my mother did. Not my grandparents. They always thought that the grandchildren, they should have a better life, as they would think, and not just be farmers. But my mother always liked to have her own garden. And so every spring, my grandfather would come up with the old farm all tractor, and we'd plow under the vegetable garden area and then till it all under too. And then somewhere between Mother's Day and Memorial Day, my mom would come in with the tomato transplants and some seeds to plant and bags of 10-10-10 fertilizer and her 7 dust. She was ready to go to assault the world. And so me and my brothers would pick the rocks and clean things up, and she would plant all of this stuff, and we would have these vegetables. But how we would have them is the traditional way that most people are used to growing a garden, is that you would plant everything, say Memorial Day or Mother's Day, and then 30 days later, you get a ton of lettuces. And 60 days later, you get a ton of bush beans. And then 70 days, you got a ton of squashes. And then you get a lot of tomatoes. You have it all, and then you don't have anything at all, nothing at all. And that was just kind of the cycle of the way people gardened back then. And it's kind of how I was taught to do vegetable production when I went to school at the University of Vermont for horticulture and plant and soil science. They were still talking about the same whole process, just of course on a bigger scale of turning and tilling the soil, using chemicals, using pesticides, growing cash crops of things that would produce all at once. And it was only until I started doing my own garden and started experimenting a little bit, and of course doing more organic gardening, because that really came into vogue, in the 80s and 90s when I was in school and then right out of school, that I started realizing there are different ways to do things. And what I see the Continuous Vegetable Garden book doing is kind of taking us to a next step, just like we've done with a lot of the ornamental and perennial gardening technologies and methods that are out there. We've kind of moved from just producing plants just because they're beautiful, but to now have more of an ecological bent to them. And that's kind of what I'm doing in this Continuous Vegetable Garden book. I've got 2 main kind of threads, you might say. One is that it is a way to garden with nature so that you're working less and you're letting nature do more of the work and it's better for in the environment, better for all the creatures that are out there, and easier for you and I. And then also the continuous part is how do we get these vegetables to come at a more balanced flow throughout the season from spring till fall, so we have a nice flow of fresh produce coming out of our garden that's not overwhelming you every couple of weeks with one vegetable and then nothing at all. And so those two main thrusts are what's in my book, and putting it all together, I think it kind of gives you a system that you can use that you'll have healthy vegetables and you'll be helping the environment at the same time.
I have to say the easier for you part is the part that I'm liking, Charlie.
Yes, a lot of people, including
Yes.
myself, like that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, before we go into all those methods and what you describe in the book, let's talk about what you're growing right now and where you garden. So, where are you located at, and maybe a little bit about the growing conditions where you are.
Well, unlike where you are, Kathy, it is
Hmm.
still kind of the end of winter up here in Vermont, where I am. We just had some snow today, believe it or not. So things are still slowly coming along. But I do have an unheated greenhouse, which we've been eating from for, I would say, a month now. A variety of things, things that are mentioned in my books, like perennial onions, for example. Sorrel is another one that's growing in there. Kale that's overwintered and, of course, sprouting up new green growth. So that's kind of what we're eating on right now. And, of course, in our basement, I have a bunch of things started as far as seed starting going to get ready to be planting things pretty soon. It's going to warm up probably the very soon. And so we'll be able to start planting the peas and the lettuces and the spinaches and all those cool season vegetables.
And do you do any ornamental gardening, or is it just all edible gardening?
No, we have very big ornamental gardens as well. I do a lot of work on TV and on
Hmm.
social media, creating videos, etc. So the gardens are pretty much our stage. So a local TV station comes down, a local radio station comes down. We do some social media, like YouTube videos, things like that. So we have lots of different ornamental gardens around, perennial flower gardens, trees, shrubs, edible hedgerows, roses, a whole bunch of different things that we grow in here. A nice diversity of plantings that sometimes feels like too much for just my wife and I, but we are still doing it. And so far, we've resisted the temptation to expand too much, and we haven't had to hire people to come in to help us. So I think it's at the right size, and we'll try to keep it this way.
Excellent. Yeah, let listeners know where they can find you on social media and your YouTube channel.
Sure. Yes. So if you want to find out who I am, what I do, you can go to my website, which is gardeningwithcharlie.com, gardeningwithcharlie.com. And you'll see on that website hundreds of articles, podcasts, videos that you can watch for free. I have webinars on there that you can take a look at. Those are available for purchase. You can find out where I'm speaking. I do talks all around the country. Northwest Flower and Garden Show this year, down to Florida. I'm going out to North Dakota soon. I mean, it's all over the place, as you well know. And also, I write books. I've written 8 different gardening books, and all the books are on my website there. You can learn about those. And I lead gardening tours. I take trips over to the UK and Europe, usually a couple times a year. I'm going to England and Portugal this year. So you can learn more about all of those trips as well, all on Gardening with Charlie.
Great. All right. So, I was just looking at the photos in your continuous vegetable garden book, and I imagine you took all of them, I think, at your home garden.
Most of them, yeah. I wouldn't say all of them, yeah.
Yeah, but it does look beautiful. And I'm sure Vermont in the summertime, idyllic growing conditions. I don't think you have the heavy clay that most of us do here in the Mid-Atlantic. Some of the Mid-Atlantic is sandy. There's that side of things too. But it sounds like you might have more rocky soils.
Well, if you want to talk clay, we can talk clay. Yes, I am in Champlain Valley, Lake Champlain Valley, and
Mm,
it is basically a clay basin. It is known for its clay soils. So one of the things you'll see when you look at some of the pictures in my book of some of the gardens that we use a lot of raised beds. I gave up a
hmm.
number of years ago trying to continually amend the soil to try to make it more friable, as we say, or looser or easier to work. And so now, through a technique called no dig gardening or lasagna gardening, we have raised beds where we use a lot of organic materials to build the soil in those beds. And then we just keep replenishing that year after year with organic materials and some compost. So it makes for really easy gardening. And of course, just like you were saying before, we're really into less work and more fun in the garden.
Hmm. Yeah, I really love the no dig method of gardening, so to speak. And then when you were talking about your grandfather plowing up every spring for the new garden, I was like, yikes. But yeah, there is something to be said about a whole fresh start, though, Charlie. You kind of like that, the blank slate. But on the other hand, it's so much better for the soil, so much easier for you to do the no dig method.
Yeah, and it's so nice to do no dig because you don't have to turn till or dig in the soil. You can literally build your beds on top of whatever you have, whether it be sandy soil, rocky soil, clay soil, and building on top of it with a raised bed, with a structured raised bed. We use wood, but you can certainly use metal and bricks and cinder blocks and stone and a whole bunch of other things. You build up that organic material and that soil so that you can literally create your no dig bed in the fall, cap it off with a little compost, and by spring you could be out there gardening. You could be planting literally right inside of that no dig bed.
Hmm.
So it makes life so much easier to do no dig gardening. And then the way you keep it going is you just follow what happens in nature. We're always kind of looking at nature and how that works. And so, of course, with deciduous forests, as an example, there's always leaves that drop in the soil underneath the forest. It always has organic material on it, or it has plants on it. It's never bare. So that's one of the traits of a no dig garden, is that you never have real bare soil. You always have something growing on it because you want to protect those microbes and feed those microbes. They actually will use some of the materials that plants make through photosynthesis that get exuded through their roots to actually survive and create networks that create a healthier soil and a healthier garden for you and for your plants.
And I note that you use wood chips in the pathways, same as I do. Makes it a lot easier to keep on top of the weeds as well.
Yes, exactly. So we have the pathways with wood chips in there. And in fact, one of the things that you can do with wood chips, which I talk about in my book, is you can grow mushrooms in them. So this is a fun story. This is me putting together a mushroom bed many years ago using the wine cap stropharia mushrooms. They're the ones that look kind of like the portobellos that you would get in restaurants,
Hmm.
and they're beautiful mushrooms. There's not a lot of mushrooms around that will look like them, that could be potentially dangerous to eat. So it's a good one to try if you want to do a home garden with these. And what I did is I created a bed, maybe 4 by 6, I think, with some wood chips. I got some arborist wood chips, put a nice layer on it, put some of the spawn on top of those wood chips, and then put another layer on top of it. Put this whole bed in a place that gets part sun. It's mostly a shady kind of spot, and kept it well watered for at least the first few weeks or so, and then throughout the summer. If you build that bed in the spring, by fall, you get mushrooms coming up. If you build it in the fall, by spring, you get mushrooms coming up. And they're very prolific. You get lots of mushrooms coming up. If you want to keep it going more than a year or two, you can just keep adding wood chips and keeping it moist, and that just keeps the spore going. But one of the fun parts about it is that if you let some of those mushrooms mature and send out spore into the environment, then the spore drops in places around your garden. So I remember finding these stropharia mushrooms in my asparagus bed, in the lettuce bed, over by the tomatoes, over underneath a tree, over by a few shrubs over here. They were just moving all over the yard, wherever they could find a place that had the right environmental conditions. So that's the kind of thing where you're getting free food from this vegetable, I would guess you call it, even though it's a mushroom, that is this self-sowing itself all around your yard.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the ultimate. And I really appreciate too, Charlie, you had a sidebar in the book on fixing a raised bed, because a lot of us have inherited, maybe moved into a house that already had broken down old raised beds. They might be full of weeds, they might have compacted soil. So, and we don't want to start from scratch. Those are there, but you're letting us know how to remediate those raised beds.
Yeah, and that often is the case. People ask me that question a lot. It's like, my bed's a mess. What do I do? Well, you could, of course, start all over again, and that is always an option. But I often tell people you can just kind of take off the top layer of it, add some organic materials to it, put a layer of compost over it, and kind of start building that way. And if the soil has gotten compacted, it's okay. I'm not a purist with the no dig system. So it's okay to
Hmm.
get one of those big forks and stick it in the ground and just loosen up that bed a little bit, make some cracks in that clay soil so that the roots can get down there, the organic materials can get down there, the water can get down there, and really create an environment that'll help those microbes thrive and turn that bed into a real healthy bed for using for planting.
And those giant garden forks are so fun. to,
That's
to
yeah.
step on and kind of rock back and forth and get the soil loosened if you need to at that point.
Yes, exactly.
And it's kind of a teamwork type thing. And I'm going to say that old double dig method. Oh my goodness, Charlie. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine that back in the day.
We did it when we both had stronger backs.
No, no, no. That is definitely for the birds.
Yeah.
So, when we think about continuous vegetable garden, of course, my mind goes straight to those perennial crops. So, asparagus that comes back every year for you, or the sunchoke is another one I think of as, if you want continuous harvest for the rest of your life, that might be one you want to grow. What are some of your, yeah.
To say, yeah, there certainly are some of those I mentioned in the book that are ones you have to be a little careful with, like the sunchokes, like the horseradish, or the stinging nettle, which is a wild plant that I mentioned. I do mention wild plants in there too, or ones that we commonly think of as weeds that are also edible and certainly easy to grow, but also good for you too. So
Mhm,
with the perennials, yeah, we think of asparagus, of course, as the obvious one as a perennial. That could go for decades if you take care of the bed, keep it weeded, keep it fertile, keep it uncrowded. If it starts self-sowing and starts getting too crowded, I know people who've had asparagus beds for literally 20, 30 years, and they every spring the asparagus comes out. It's one of the nice things about perennial vegetables in that they're often the first things that come out of the ground. So things like asparagus, rhubarb is one of the early crops. Sorrel, I
mhm,
mentioned greens like sorrel. The sorrel is already up in our greenhouse, and the sorrel patch in our garden will be up pretty soon too. They're often coming up and you can actually harvest them when you don't have much else going on, which is really kind of a nice thing about perennial vegetables. Also, they don't require, of course, as much work. If you do have to maintain them, so you have to take care of them that way. And they fit into that whole no dig system because you're not turning, tilling, or disturbing the soil. So you're allowing that soil to build up those networks that are really healthy for your plants. So I talk about horseradish, I talk about rhubarb, I talk about sorrel, I talk about some that you don't normally think of, like some of the onions. The bunching onions, the evergreen hardy white, is a bunching onion you can always buy from seed suppliers and grow it and get some scallions out of it. People don't really realize that that onion is hardy to 0 degrees. You can literally leave it out there. And I did in Vermont, and we got below zero this winter, and it's already popping back up again. And if you leave it out there long enough, it starts creating more little offshoots, which could be your scallions for this year. And as long as you leave something behind, you don't harvest everything, it'll become a perennial in your garden. Another
mhm.
fun onion one is the Egyptian or the walking onion. I don't know if you've ever grown that one, Kathy, but it's pretty funny the way it moves around.
Yeah, and kind of flops and kind of goes on its own. I know
Yeah.
people who have it as a houseplant even and pass it along that way.
Oh, really? I haven't seen that as a houseplant, but yeah, it drops. If you've never grown it before, the top of the onion blade, I guess, or leaf would have a top set of onions. And when it gets heavy enough, it'll pull that leaf down, and then the top set hits the soil, and wherever it hits the soil, it roots itself. So it literally looks like
Mhm,
over time it's walking across your garden. But it's another really hardy plant. That one again is up already in both the garden and the unheated greenhouse. You can harvest it now for green onions and scallion type of things. You can eat the onions too. And then there's also some of the brassicas that were originally perennial plants. And then through breeding and selection, they became more biennials and annual plants. So you can go back in time and try to find some of those plants. And some of the seed companies, some of the specialty seed companies have done that. So there's kales, for example, like the kaleidoscope mix kale and cosmic kale, which is one I've grown, which are like little shrubs of kale. They're hardy to well below zero without any problem to them. And you can get the young leaves that come out of those kales are really tender, so you can use them in salads. The older leaves tend to be tougher, as any of those plants would be, so you'd use it more in cooking. But it's a perennial supply of leafy greens like kale. And the same is true of the broccolis. There's a purple sprouting broccoli that's hardy down to zone 7 where you are, and that one will just keep coming back year after year with those little heads, like the broccolini heads of broccoli that you'll
mhm.
have. So I talk about those in that whole chapter on perennials and many other ones. Some of the ones that you think of as just ornamentals, like daylilies and hostas, are actually edible and delicious too. So I won't tell you any more about it. I don't want to ruin the surprise.
That would be probably on the more expensive side, depending on how much you paid for those hostas and daylilies.
Yeah, I'm
But
not a
the
big
more common ones, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go for the more common ones. I don't think there's any
Mhm.
flavor difference in the different varieties. So, yeah, get one that
No.
spreads a lot. It's a huge plant. You tend to be dividing it every few years anyway, and eat some of those shoots as they come up when they're small, like 4 to 6 inches tall. And in Japan, where it's very popular, they make tempura out of it. They put it in soup. They saute it with butter and salt and pepper. They eat it in many different ways.
Well, I'm going to have to try a few of mine, of course, the common one,
The
the
common.
plantain lily. Yes. And then I was just thinking about what you were saying about the perennial broccoli. For us, brassicas are a little tough. White flies move in. The heat of the summer is really tough on the brassicas. So maybe even thinking part shade might be better for us here in the mid-Atlantic and more southern regions to try those out.
Yes, that's very true. If you're in a hotter climate, a place, definitely try putting them in a shadier spot, especially from the afternoon sun, and that will help them get through the summer. Because I know as we go further south, it's summer that's more of the issue than winter. Up north where I am, it's winter that's the limiting factor with gardening.
Yeah, and with the brassicas, it's always heartbreak. Like just as we're getting Brussels sprouts forming, just as we're getting a good head on the broccoli, that's when we get 95-degree days in May or early June. And then the opposite going from the fall into the winter.
Yeah, yeah. Nice thing about the sprouting broccolis, these perennial ones, but is that they produce early too. Again, another trait of a perennial vegetable is that it'll produce pretty early in the season. So you could be probably eating them by now, where you are if you were growing them before the really hot weather comes in.
Yeah, and I think that's great for having some early harvests and continual. And I think one of the themes in your book is not having everything come in at once, like you were talking about with your mother's garden, and then you have this big canning, freezing session that you have to get all this stuff harvested at once. And so we're not talking no maintenance, right, Charlie? We're talking lower maintenance.
Yes, of course. There's some assumptions I make with this book. One is that you like to garden. That's why you're looking at this
Hmm.
book. So this is not a book for someone who's what I call the weekend warrior gardener, who goes out there and plants everything in one weekend and then goes back maybe a week later to just check on it and see how it's doing. This is really a book that's more for someone who enjoys going out into their yard and going out into their garden. It doesn't have to be every day, but it's at least maybe 3, 4 times a week, even if it's only for 10, 15 minutes. You're just checking on things. And that's really the way that this system works the best, where you can go out there and say, oh, okay, this plant is done. I can cut it, remove it, and put something else in there. Or I need to pull a few weeds, even though you don't tend to have a lot of weeds in this system. I can pull some few weeds here or do some watering there. But you like being part of the whole ecological system, the whole gardening system. So that's kind of one of the biggest assumptions in this book, is that you're going to be out there on a regular basis because you like doing this. Also,
Hmm.
it's not for someone, even though it can be adapted, like you're saying, it's not for someone who wants to can 50 jars of tomatoes this summer or make 25 jars of dilly beans or whatever it is. It's really not a big production garden. It's all about producing small quantities fresh that you can just have and then move on to the next thing, and always having something fresh from the garden.
I almost think it's like going back to the kitchen yard garden, 18th century or even earlier, where you would just have a couple of chickens on the side and then you would have what you can grow and use, your pot liquor garden. So you can just go out and then grab a few things, a couple carrots there. You're never just going to pick all the carrots at once.
Right, right. You just kind of pick what you need, kind of thing. And because you're planting small quantities of them, you're never wasting much of the food. Like we would do with my mother's garden. Of course, we'd never eat all the lettuce, so half of it would bolt or ever get to all the beans, and some of them would be so tough we couldn't even chew them. So that doesn't tend to happen because you are just planting little bits of it, and so it's easy to keep up with it.
Hmm. And that makes it lower maintenance all around.
Yes,
So
exactly.
after the perennials, we move on in continuous gardening to the self-sowers, which is my favorite thing, Charlie. I love a plant that will seed itself and do the whole process for me. What I love about that section is that you have some precautions about self-sowing, like that there's a disease potential and other concerns. And I don't usually hear anybody talking about those, Charlie, so I thought that was refreshing.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've had enough disease in our gardens over the years. to know what could go wrong. So self-sowing is a fun thing to do. It's a great thing to do with certain vegetables, but it can be kind of tricky with other vegetables and flowers and herbs. And so you just have to be very observant. And again, another reason for being out in your garden on a regular basis so you can watch for these things. But I got into this whole idea of self-sowing on one of my radio programs up in Vermont, my gardening radio program. It's a call-in show. And I remember years ago when I was a young budding horticulturist, just trying out, just branching out, trying to at least flower and fruit beautifully. Anyway, I was using all these very silly analogies. This guy called in and he said, I've got a way of sowing my lettuce that you probably don't know about. And I asked him what it was. And so he told me that what he does is in late winter, he goes out into his garden, and where he wants the lettuce to be, he'll sow the lettuce seed on top of the snow. And then he just leaves it there. And the snow melts and the lettuce goes down. And he swears that the lettuce would germinate sooner than any lettuce he'd ever put into the garden. It'd be healthier because he wouldn't have to move it around anywhere. And he got better crops that way. So me being a precocious young horticulturist, I didn't really believe him until I tried it and it actually worked. And then I started thinking, well, why even bother getting the seed? Why don't you just let the plants make the seed? And so I started experimenting with letting, in this case, lettuce go to seed, drop its seed. And what I found out is that even in our cold climate here in Vermont, it'll drop its seed in the summer, and then it'll germinate in the fall. And we'll have a fall crop of lettuce. And then some of that seed will literally overwinter. And then next spring, it'll germinate on its own. And we'll have it in the bed, we'll have it in the pathways, it'll be all over the place. And all we need to do to manage it is to edit, become a garden editor. Always wanted to be a garden editor. So you go out there when the lettuces are big enough and you move them around to where you want, you thin them out, and you have a free crop of lettuce every year. And the nice thing about lettuce, as well as a number of other vegetables, is they don't cross very readily. So you're going to get a lettuce variety that looks kind of similar to the one that you had originally put in there. But it's a way to not have to buy lettuce seed every year or lettuce transplants. It's a way to get your lettuce seed to germinate when it wants to germinate, not so much when you think it should be germinating. And it's always interesting to see when Mother Nature knows it's the right time. And that's a good indicator for other cool season things. When you're thinking of planting your kale, for example, or your spinach or your arugula, if you see the lettuce starting to germinate, you know the soil's warm enough, the sunlight is strong enough, there's enough moisture in the soil that it can actually start growing. So it kind of got me into this whole realm now of we let a number of things self-sow in our garden, not just vegetables, but herbs, dill and fennel and cilantro, edible flowers like calendulas and nasturtiums. There's a number of different things that are self-sowing in the garden, and we just manage them. We just edit them every spring, thinning them out if they're overcrowded and moving them around to where we want them.
Yeah, I think for me, the two that are very reliable self-sowers are arugula and basil, especially holy basil. That comes back almost always every year for me. And I love that you included cucamelon, also known as mouse melon, has a lot of other fun names to it. But you include it as an annual, and it can self-sow if you leave some of the fruits drop off into the soil. But I've actually seen some people make it as a perennial vine by just mounding a lot of compost or a pile of leaves on top of where the vine was growing and having luck with that. In a mild winter, maybe for you guys.
Yeah, mild winter, but sure, just leaving them to drop. Another one that I love to have like that is the ground cherry. It's in the
Hmm.
tomato family. And that's another one that I planted once many years ago, and now it always pops up wherever the old plant was in the spring, and I just move it around to where I want to. So it's kind of fun to have these plants, not just the greens, but some of these other plants kind of popping up. You do, as you were mentioning, though, originally, we do have to be cautious about diseases and problems with these plants. Some people will take seedling tomatoes that have popped up from tomato fruits that they left on the ground in the fall and use those again. And that's definitely a way to do that. Of course, with tomatoes, they can be cross-pollinated very easily, and they could be hybrids. So if they're hybrids, they're
Hmm.
not going to necessarily come true to seed. And if they've been cross-pollinated, the tomato you get from that new plant may not be like the one you got from the old plant. But there is also the concern about diseases, blight diseases in particular, late blight and things of that nature. So you have to really be on your guard to watch those plants and make sure if you see any signs of disease on them, you want to destroy them. You don't even want to play around with it because you don't want to infect your garden or maybe someone else's garden in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's so true about the tomato seedlings. Like, free tomato seedlings. but usually thin, spindly little guys, and they're not the tomato that you planted because they were cross-pollinated with another hybrid.
Right, yeah. I do mention in the book a couple of the open pollinated ones that do come fairly true to seed, like Matt's wild cherry and black cherry are some. And those would be ones you can experiment with to see if they come back to be a similar kind of fruit to them. But of course, you want to avoid any of the cucurbits, the squashes, the melons, the cucumbers, except for something like cucamelon. That's a little exception to the rule, because those are always going to be cross-pollinating with something, and you never know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a great choice for Matt's wild cherry, which the current tomato is usually a pretty reliable self-seeder and so prolific. And you are not going to get all those fruits ever. There are some that are always going to fall on the ground and germinate for you. So once you have it, you pretty much have it forever.
Yep, you have it for life. It becomes a perennial, pretty much.
Yep. And that's what's so great about that one. And it's so good eating it on a hot summer day out in the garden and just, one handful after another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many of them.
And I love your compost pile surprise. And that in particular, I'm thinking of, the jack-o'-lantern that you carved, or the one extra zucchini that you couldn't handle anymore and chuck into the compost pile. And again, you could let it grow, right? But it's kind of a waste. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not going to, chances are you're not going to get something that's going to be really very edible. It might be an oddity, and we always have to judge at the local county fair up here, and we always have a vegetable oddity category, and people bring in all kinds of weird things. And I swear a lot of them are crosses in that family that just happened to be something that grew out of the compost pile. They let it fruit, and oh, look at that. It looks kind of like a pumpkin, kind of like a zucchini. We'll bring it to the fair.
Yeah, and some of the self-sowers, of course, are on the weed side of things, and we don't necessarily want them self-sowing, but you include chickweed, which is right now trying to take over my community garden plot, and I'm always fighting it, but I do appreciate that it also is an edible.
Yes, it is an edible. Makes a great pesto if you want to make some pesto, Kathy, and freeze it for the winter. But yes, I do talk about those. I talk about lamb's quarters, which is in the Chenopodium family, the quinoa family. That's a leafy green amaranth, or we call it red-rooted pigweed. It's another one that comes up. And once you have one of these plants, one of these weeds in your garden that it self-sows, you'll have it forever because it produces thousands of seed. But instead of cursing it every time you see it come up, you can use it as an edible, and especially when the plants are young. And there are varieties of these now. For example, the lamb's quarters, there's one called Spreen. It's got magenta-colored new leaves on it, which is very attractive, actually. And I, of course, being of Italian descent, love growing dandelions. But the dandelions that you buy from a seed company are not the same as you see in your lawn. It's not the yellow-flowered ones that are flat, kind of horizontal and flat on the surface. These are more vertical, upright plants because they're in the chicory family, different family than the one that you have in your lawn. But the leaves are the same. They have the same shape to them. They have the same flavor to them. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't go to seed. It doesn't blossom. Well, it does actually form a blossom late in the year, a little blue flower. But for the most part, you're just getting the leaves. So you can cut it. It'll come right back up again, cut it a number of times, use it. We use it for cooking, use it in salads, a bunch of different things. And it's, especially in your climate, a perennial. It'll come back and it can self-sow in places like our climate up here.
Nice. I'll have to try that one out. Every once in a while, somebody brings a pack of those Italian dandelions to our annual seed exchanges, and I'm always like, no.
Well, I grew up with it. Yeah, in Connecticut, I remember my Italian relatives from New York City coming up to the farm, taking a weekend in the summer to come up there, and they would go out in the fields with baskets, and they would gather all what they called it was cigardia, kind of a slang of the Italian word. And they would put it in the basket and bring it back to the farmhouse. And my grandmother would saute it up with olive oil and garlic and onions and tomatoes. And then they'd have a homemade bread and some bottles of wine. And it was a feast just based on these dandelions. And they have a little bit of a slightly bitter flavor if you get them early in the season. If you get them too late, it's probably too bitter for most people's taste, but it's a little bit of a bitter flavor. And I told that to a friend once, and he said, well, Charlie, what doesn't taste good? Mix in with olive oil, garlic, onions, tomatoes, and a bottle of wine and bread. He said,
exactly.
Yeah, you've got a good point.
I would say most any green will work that way.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turf grass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
So your next session of the book is on seed and plant saving. And so one of the classic ones, of course, are garlic. So to go through that whole annual process and then I always save the best and biggest of my garlic bulbs for planting the following year. And then every few years, you maybe renew that, because that'll even start to peter out for me. How about for you, Charlie?
Well, it seems to be still going strong for us. I've been doing it for a number of years now, and I do exactly what you're talking about. I choose the biggest bulbs with the biggest cloves and save those, put them separate and down in the basement, and use all the other ones to eat. We're still eating garlic from last year, and we'll probably continue right up until we harvest it again this year in July. But that's probably one of the easiest vegetables. If you want to start out and you like garlic, that's a little caveat there. You do have to like garlic because you'll get a lot of it. Every clove you put in the ground is going to turn into a bulb with maybe 7 or 8 more cloves, depending on the variety. So that's an easy one to have come back year after year. The only time I've ever had it not come back you plant it in the fall, of course, from a fall planting is I put it in clay soil that was too wet and it just rotted there. But now raised beds, it's not ever an issue. It's well-drained soil and it does really well.
Yeah, all those Mediterranean bulbs, that's really tough to be sitting in wet clay soil, especially in a wet winter, like with a lot of snow or anything.
Yes, exactly.
And then what I found interesting in the taking cuttings section is I know a lot of people will go to their local supermarket and buy a little basil plant, put it on the kitchen windowsill in the winter, and then when they're done with that, chuck it and then buy another one.
Yeah.
But why not take cuttings just like you take cuttings to start your basil, or you can start basil from seed?
Right, exactly. So a lot of the herbs are like that. The oreganos, the thymes, the basils, sage. A lot of these plants you can take cuttings of them, root them, and that's a nice way to overwinter them if you're in a colder climate where it's not going to overwinter in your garden. You can take your cuttings in the fall, root them, bring them into pots, bring them inside like you're talking about, in a nice sunny window. Keep them in there, enjoy them. They're not going to grow a lot, especially during the darker months of November till February, but you can at least have them there and have them growing. And then by this time of year, when we start getting into spring, now it's going to start really filling out and you can really enjoy them and then move them back outside. And when you move them outside, you're moving out a mature plant, not a little seedling that you got at a garden center, but a mature plant. And that mature plant will continue to grow and continue to give you a lot of production, more so and sooner than you would from that little seedling.
Good point with that. And then you describe overwintering peppers, which I've done for some of the more ornamental ones, or a pepper that I really wanted to keep, and you just kind of hack it back and then pot it up is the best way I can describe it. It's not the most attractive winter house plant for the windowsill, but it lasts through the winter. It ekes its way through.
Yeah, that's really all you're trying to do with the peppers at that point is you cut them way back, so you take them out of your garden, wash off all the soil so you don't not taking in any disease and insects into your house. Trim the roots a little bit, repot it into a pot with fresh potting soil and cut it way back so there's just a couple little V's. I show a picture of one in the book. You can see what it looks like. And then you put it somewhere where it's going to stay around 50 degrees and bright indirect light. So a spare bedroom, a sunroom, somewhere where it's going to stay around 50. If it gets too warm, it'll start growing. If it gets too cold, it'll get stunted. So it's kind of finicky that way. But if you could do that, then this time of year, you can start bringing it back out into a sunnier spot, let it leaf back out again. And then when it's warm enough, put it outside. And just like we were talking about with those basil plants, it's going to be a mature pepper that'll produce fruit sooner for you and more of it because it has a mature root system.
Yeah, I think you do a much more drastic cutback than I've ever done. So I'm going to definitely try that next fall when I'm, pulling out those last of the pepper plants and seeing which ones I want to save.
Yeah. Whack it back, Kathy.
So, and then you describe overwintering tomatoes. And Charlie, I have never heard of this or tried it myself, overwintering a whole tomato plant.
Yeah, this is a fun tip that I got from Savvy Gardener, Jessica Walzer, and her friends who are running that website. And they told me about it, and I tried it, and it's really kind of a fun thing to do. This is, of course, tomatoes and peppers are perennials. So in a warm climate, they will overwinter. But this is a way to overwinter them in a colder climate. So what you're going to do with your tomato, similar to the pepper, is that you're going to choose the variety or the tomato that you want, hopefully one that doesn't have a lot of disease on it. That could be one of the things that would turn this really rotten very fast. But if you have a plant that's relatively healthy, I mean, you could have some leaf blights and stuff like that. That's kind of natural. But relatively healthy, you dig the plant up out of the soil, you wash all the roots again, trimming them up again, and you cut the top way back. I mean, way back. You should have maybe a couple stems that are 8-10 inches long showing, coming off the crown of that plant, and that's it. No leaves, nothing else. That's all you want to have. And then you'll take that root system that you have, lay it down maybe on top of an old t-shirt or an old piece of cloth, wrap up the roots in some sphagnum peat moss or some sawdust that's been moistened, so keep the roots nice and moist, and then wrap it with the t-shirt and then wrap that with some plastic wrap. And then put, of course, a little tag in there so you can remember what variety it was, because you'll never remember next spring. And then just put it in a basement somewhere say between 35 and 45 degrees. The dark is fine. It's just going to go dormant. You can check it maybe every month or two to make sure the roots haven't dried out. And then again, coming in the spring, you want to bring it back up, pot it back up into a nice pot with some potting soil, put it in a sunny window, get it to leaf back out again. And when it's ready, plant it in the garden. And just like that pepper, you'll have the earliest tomatoes on your block because you have a mature plant that's just going to go right into growing, and you'll have a lot more production from that plant as well.
So it's almost like what you might do with a tropical bulb or caladium that you want to overwinter, except for you're not going fully bare root. You're at least wrapping it in something, some type of moisture.
Yes, it's the same kind of idea between like canna lilies or dahlias, those kinds of plants that you might be overwintering in a basement. You're just trying to get it to survive, to come back so you can replant it.
Fascinating. So everybody try it. Let me know how it goes for you. I'll be super curious. And so the next section of your book is the Perpetual Fruit Patch, which, of course, we want to grow our own berries, our own fruit trees, if you have space. And I really appreciated that you have like an edible hedgerow and sketches and plans for doing that sort of thing. Because to me, Charlie, those can get a little out of control, right? You have like one or two, like a kiwi, a bush cherry, and say I was going to say a fig, maybe, all combined. How do you keep them well maintained?
Well, that's the key with these. The assumption I'm making with this chapter is that you're going to be looking for dwarf varieties of fruits, and especially fruits that you only need one bush or tree to get fruit from. So, for example, a self-pollinating cherry. So it's not going to take up as much space in your yard, and you're going to have plants that are a manageable size. And that might mean for figs in your climate, where you luckily can grow them as a regular tree, where I can't do that up here. You might consider getting some dwarf varieties of them, or just planting them in pots, which is what I do here in Vermont because I need to protect them. But down there, the pot will actually cause a dwarfing effect on that tree. So I have a fig tree, a brown turkey, and a Celeste fig tree, two of them. And they are in these pots that are probably about 20 inches in diameter. And I put them in our basement every year, pull them back out every year. And they're 10, 12 years old, maybe even older than that. And they're only up about 6, 7 feet tall. That's it. So it's a way to take a plant that can normally get really huge and keep it dwarf. So I talk about that in the book. I talk about having a perpetual fruit harvest by planting a little bit of fruit that's going to mature at different times throughout the year. In our cold climate up here, I have fresh fruit from our garden from May till November. In your climate, you can have it year round, no problem at all. And it's all about selecting the right kinds of fruits and then planting them in such a way that they're going to be harvested at the time when you want it to.
And I love that point about selecting dwarf varieties, because inevitably one of them starts to shade the others. And with fruits and berries, they want as much sun as possible so you can get that great harvest.
Yeah, that's really kind of critical. If you're going to do the edible hedgerow that I talked about, you want to make sure it's in a full sun location. The fun thing about that hedgerow, one of the little asides is when we're talking about fruits, is where we grow our strawberries. So our strawberries, we do have a bed of them in our garden, but we mostly use them as a ground cover now all throughout our yard. So they're underneath trees and in shrubs, and they're all through that edible hedgerow. And they still produce fruit because they're a ground cover. They just spread all over the place. Now, I'm not going to have enough fruit to go to the farmer's market and sell it all, but I don't really want that. I just want enough fruit that I'm going to enjoy. So the birds get some, the chipmunks get some, the squirrels get some. Sometimes I see a little squirrel munching on a strawberry sitting on our deck, and we get some, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, I love that idea of interplanting, especially with the edible ground covers. And of course, you might want to do a little protection. You can share some with the birds and squirrels, but do you have heavy deer pressure where you are, Charlie?
Yeah, we have fences up around a lot of our gardens because we basically built our house in a deer yard. So they still come through here. They're very habitual animals. So they come through here all the time, and they still jump the fence and every once in a while get into some things. But for the most part, we've learned how to coexist with them.
Yeah, I think the fence is your best defense, so to speak.
Yeah.
So once they know that you are a food garden, they will come back.
Yes.
So any other tips for putting together a small fruit and berry garden, especially maybe I'm thinking of some of our listeners who are on small city lots, like literally postage stamp size lots?
Yeah, so the dwarf variety is going to make a big difference. So, for example, a blueberry, which is a very easy shrub to grow, especially if you have acidic soil or you acidify the soil so that it can grow well. There are dwarf varieties of those now that only get a couple feet tall. So instead of having a big high bush blueberry that can grow 5, 6 feet tall, you have a smaller plant that can be used as a landscape plant around your house, for example. And of course, the one thing with a lot of these berries is that you're not the only one who likes them. So you mentioned deer, but we have a big issue, of course, with birds on getting on berries. So we do have to cover things to get a good crop of things, like the blueberries, for example. The cherries is another one, and there's one that we grow is called a honeyberry, which is one of the earliest fruits that you can grow, and it looks kind of like a little mounded spirea plant. It's in the honeysuckle family. You do need 2 bushes to have 2 different varieties for cross pollination. But what's great about it is it produces these purple cylinder-shaped berries 2 weeks before strawberries are ready. So it's the first berry that comes out of our garden. And what's beautiful about it is that it produces in abundance with me literally doing nothing to it. I have done nothing to these bushes for 10 years. I should be pruning them. I probably should put a little fertilizer or something. I have done nothing to them. And they still produce every spring for us. Me and the dogs go out there and they get one, I get one, and we put one in the bucket. And when we're done with our main harvest, I take the netting off and let the birds have the rest.
I love that you share with your dogs.
Very healthy dogs.
So remind our listeners again your website, Charlie.
It's gardeningwithcharlie.com, gardeningwithcharlie.com, and you can find out more about this book and my other books and all the other things I'm doing out there in the gardening world.
And we'll have that link in our show notes. We'll also have a link to the Continuous Vegetable Gardens page so they can direct order the book. And summing up on the perpetual food gardening movement, Charlie, what maybe if they were a brand new beginning gardener, what would be the one thing you would say to start with?
I would start with just one raised bed. So I do have a chapter we didn't get to that has a lot of designs on how you can get 6, 7, 8 crops out of one raised bed during one growing season. So I would start with that and then use these techniques of putting some succession plantings in there, growing things you like. Start small, go with things that you feel confident in growing and have some success. Because once you have some success at it, that will inspire you to try some of these other plants and other techniques.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Charlie.
Well, it's been great to be on your show. Thank you, Kathy.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Bloodroot plant profile. Bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis, is a perennial plant that is native to the eastern half of North America. It is also known as redroot, bloodwort, Canada puccoon, red puccoon, black paste, and Indian paint. This common name derives from the fact that the Native Americans used the red juice from the roots and stems of the plant as a dye and insect repellent. It has short-lived white flowers in early spring, and the foliage is lobed and stays in a short mound. It is hardy to USDA zones 3 to 8. It's a member of the poppy family. Bloodroot prefers to grow in part to full shade in well-drained, humus-rich soils. The seeds of the plant are dispersed by ants. The plant can also spread and form a nice ground cover under trees. This woodland plant is a spring ephemeral, meaning that it will go dormant and disappear by midsummer, similar to cyclamen. It's best to move or divide it just before its summer dormancy. Bloodroot is pollinated by native bees. It is deer-resistant due to toxic alkaloids in the leaves and roots. Bloodroot, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, it looks like everything is about 3 weeks ahead of schedule in blooming, including the parrot tulips, azaleas, and tree peonies. Over at the community garden plot, the blackberries and strawberry plants are already flowering. In garden tips that we shared this week, when hardening off seedlings, protect the young plants from deer, rabbits, and slugs and other pests by placing them on a table or somewhere they cannot reach them, anywhere but the ground. In local upcoming gardening events that you might want to attend if you're in the Washington, D.C. region, the Silver Spring Garden Club is meeting on Monday, April 20th from 7:30 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland. The topic is Best Pruning Practices. The meeting is free and open to all. You can find out more about that at silverspringgardenclub.com or at the club's Facebook page. And then on April 25th at 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. is the Northern Alexandria Native Plant Sale. Another native plant sale fundraiser in Stafford, Virginia takes place on May 2nd from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. The Bethesda Community Garden Club plant sale takes place Thursday, May 14th at the Montgomery Farm Women's Cooperative Market on Wisconsin Avenue in Bethesda. That is in the morning from 9 a.m. to noon. It's a unique public plant sale that features over 1,000 plants that thrive in the DC metro area. And finally, the Northern Virginia chapter of the Azalea Society of America is having their annual spring plant sale at Meadowlark Botanical Gardens in Vienna, Virginia on April 25th. The rain date is April 26th, and that is their major fundraiser for the year. Please attend the sale if you love azaleas and support the chapter.
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Green Prince on A Growing Gardener. I'm Trying Really I Am by Lou Ellen Hughes. It was my intention to take the bottles to the Redemption Center, meet my friends Laura and Lauren for lunch, and then come home. It took me 10 hours. You see, my friends are gardeners, good ones, paid to be ones actually. They're certified professionals, and they work in the field in which they excel, the field. They grow fruits and vegetables, they educate the public, they save heirloom variety seeds, and therefore future gardens and gardeners. They are smart gardeners. I needed cucumbers because my plants died. I am obviously not a professional. I recently found out that I don't even know how to hill potatoes correctly. So when they invited me to go with them for the afternoon, I accepted. I sat in the back seat, listening to them talk about their work, leaning forward and allowing any tidbit of valuable information that wafted back toward me to fully envelop and educate me, like a thirsty flower leans toward a drop of rain. I have no idea where we went as we hopscotched across western Maine, but we visited some of the state's finest greenhouses, farms, and gardens. Laura and Lauren knew exactly where these places are because they are gardeners. One of the greenhouses was on a hill with a fantastic view of the mountains. If anything can turn my gaze from flowers, that is it. In awe, I blurted out to the proprietor, "Have you seen this view?" He looked at me like I was a well-hilled potato head. Another greenhouse garden was devoted to a seed saver program. While my friend Lauren spoke with the farmer, I wandered from plant to plant like an insect, continually asking, "What is that? What is that?" There was stuff growing everywhere, acres and acres, on purpose. He, Lauren, and Laura talked the talk of highly educated growers, stopping at a bed to discuss varieties, then going over to a field to talk about techniques. They do that because they are dedicated gardeners. I followed behind, daydreaming. As the end of our visit neared, the farmer made wooden markers for the plants that were to go with Lauren. I asked if I could help. He handed me some cedar plant markers and said, "You are ornamental." He then trotted up to the house for a pen. I turned to my companions. "What do you suppose he meant?" Lauren said, "Maybe he thinks you're pretty." I scoffed. "I doubt that. More likely he thinks I'm useless." Laura laughed. "Perhaps he thinks you're pretty useless." I didn't mind. I can take a little teasing. After all, I'm just a growing gardener. I'm learning more and happy to do so. Anyway, after 10 hours, I made it home and was ready to plant my new cucumber plants. Hold on, do they grow in hills? This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprince.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC podcast episode 124, Raised Bed Gardening with Joe Lample, episode 110, Self-Sowing Plants, episode 186, Planning Your Vegetable Garden. You can become a supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. Happy gardening!